Hi, my name is Harrison with the Luxury Pergola. Today we're talking about our slat receivers, which are good for composite wood. In this case is what we're going to be going over for creating a slat wall with a concealed fastener so that it looks as seamless as possible. Today we're going to be using 1x6 red cedar with a smooth face on one side, rough face on the other. 1x6 meaning 3/4 by 5.5 actual dimension. We're going to install 17 of them on a 9-foot opening. Now this 9-foot opening is actually, we have a base collar at the bottom of our pergola, so it's 3.75 inches short of a full 9 feet. This is all helpful if you don't have a pergola and you're installing this. You need to know these measurements. The slat itself, the cedar itself is cut to 128 3/4 inches. That gives us a little play on each side as we slot each of these in place. Everything comes in tubes. You can take the receivers out. Each of them comes also with a pack of 20 number 10 self-tapping screws like this. So installing the receivers is pretty simple. I'll go over it a couple times here. So one is, this is the shape. It's gonna have this little lifted legs here and here. And then obviously on this side, you can see it ends in a little lifted leg here as well. That's because this screw cover can go on the front or it can go on the sides. In this case, the front doesn't mean anything to you. It goes on the side. I would pre-slide on your first one. So I would pre-slide on your screw cover for your first one. And then that way you have a good reference or flat reference to put against the side of whatever you're matching. In our case, obviously it's our pergola. And then we're gonna clamp that receiver into place from bottom to top so that it stays nice and even against that post. And then we're gonna screw through this wall here, one here, one here, and one here at the top. I would do top, bottom, and then come back for the one in the middle. Once you add this rail here, slide the screw cover up, and then slide the next receiver onto this screw cover so that it keeps it nice and flush with this receiver, the bottom receiver, so that you get a nice joint. Screw off that bottom after you plumb the top a little bit, and then slide the screw cover all the way up to the top of the other receiver. Make sure it's even with the post and screw off that top. So all we're gonna do is rinse and repeat, clamp them in place, screw them off, use the screw cover to hold it flush, keep this screw cover flush to the outside of the post so you get a nice clean line, but only leave one screw cover on for the entire wall. Don't leave all 3 screw covers on because you have to take the screw cover off to screw your slats in place through that face. If you leave all these screw covers on, you can't access those. You'll have to pry them off. You're gonna hate doing that because it's a really tight fit. You're probably gonna bend this as you do it. So if you're installing this on our aluminum pergola, this is an 1/8 inch thick, roughly, piece of aluminum. It's gonna go into our post, which is also an 1/8 inch thick. So just keep in mind that that's a decent amount of aluminum. As you are screwing off, you may need to back the screw up a little bit and then keep driving it to make sure all the shavings are clear so it doesn't gum up the screw itself. Just makes it easier. The other option is to pre-drill through this face just so you have one less face to go through and then run your screw. So now we're gonna start setting the wood. Now, as I said, I already told you the dimension and how many. These are 1x6 red cedar. Because they're a 3/4 board, they're gonna be a little bit loose inside here. This is a 1-inch cavity. It's a 1-inch because it's designed for our aluminum slat. But because it's 1-inch, you can use a 5/4 board. You can use this 1x6 like this, especially with rough cedar. It's obviously gonna be a little thicker than normal 3/4 inches. It's gonna be closer to 7/8. So you have a little extra room in there to use whatever it is you decide to use. If you wanna use composite, you can use composite. I have a piece of the cedar here. Obviously 1x6, like I said, rough on one side, smooth on the other. When you fit it in there, you'll notice, as I said, there's a little bit of slop. Not an extreme amount, but obviously there's some. When you screw it off, which is why we have the side where you screw it onto, when you screw it off, it'll pull it tight, so don't worry too much right now. What we're gonna do is a 1-inch spacing. And because we're doing a 1-inch spacing, the issue you get into is this board needs to go into this cavity and into a cavity on the other side of the post. Imagine that's the other side of the post. It can't go in there straight, right? We have to tilt it at an angle as we set it in. The issue is that when you do this many boards with this tight of spacing, there isn't that much room to put them all in as you build it. So what we're doing is we're pre-putting them all in because, as you see here, once we start going up the wall, the space that we have to put the board in diagonally gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And we need enough room to put all the boards in. So we're sliding them all in, and then we're gonna lift them up and screw them into place. If you want anything tighter than a 1-inch spacing, you're probably gonna have to build it on the ground away from the wall and then lift it into place and then screw it off into whatever you're mounting it to. So just keep that in mind. The only downside with that obviously is if you accidentally screw it off like that or like that. This is why I like building the receivers first and then dropping the slats in. So we're dropping in all the slats right now, all the way up the wall. You can see how much room I need. Now, the fun part is on the very last board, in our case, we couldn't fit it diagonally. So what we actually had to do, thankfully, wood is a little bit bendier than aluminum. We bent the board a little bit just to get it into the receiver and then let it bounce back. That was able to get it in place. If I was putting 18 boards in, it would never have fit, which is why I say anything tighter than a 1-inch spacing with wood like this, you're probably better off installing it, at least the last one, separate from the unit and then lifting it into place, unless you find some other creative method of how to install it. So what I'm doing here is I'm measuring and pre-drilling through the face of the receiver, through the face here, so that once I raise the board in place, I don't have to fuss around and find a screw. That's if you're using a wood screw. So you're gonna wanna pre-drill through the aluminum so that you can run a wood screw through here and into the board itself. In the end, what I found was that these, even though they're self-tappers and they're typically designed for sheet metal, these bit really well. These are what come with the receivers themselves, because again, this was originally designed for our aluminum slats. These work just fine. If you don't like the idea of using what's originally a sheet metal screw for wood, you don't have to use it. You can go out and buy whatever screws you plan on using instead, but these do work and this is what we used. So we're gonna lift the board up in place, hold it tight to the top of our reference surface, in this case, the bottom of our beam, screw it in place, and then we're gonna lift up the next board. There you're seeing that we actually used a wood screw. That's why I say we tried both to make sure that we knew which one we liked. Again, I got a better bite out of these, but it depends on what screw you like. I also like hex heads because they stay on the driver a lot better. These magnetic drivers that we ship with our unit are great because they actually hold the screw in place. When you use Phillips heads, I mean, you probably know they fall off all the time. So I really like that aspect of it. Point is, what we do is we lift it up in place and we have to space them out correctly. I said 1-inch spacing. So this is something that we sell. This is a 1x2x3 block. It's a machinist block. So you have a 1-inch dimension there, 2 inches there, 3 inches there, and it's a precision dimension. So it's also threaded. So if you want to use those threads to pull it out, let's say you jammed it somewhere and you need to get it out, you can use these threads to pre-thread a screw and pull it out. But these are really good. They're heavy, so don't drop them on our pergola. But they are really good at holding good tolerance and getting everything where you want it. In this case, we're using 1-inch spacing. So you'll see we always have this sideways like this in between each of these boards. Set it on top of the board, and then we raise it up to the bottom of the other board, and then we pin it off. And then we rinse and repeat that exact same thing over and over again. So hold the spacer there, drive your screw, done. And then same thing on the other side. Hold the spacer, drive your screw. One thing is probably likely as you use a self-tapper, it will probably bottom out on the aluminum before it sucks all the wood back. So if you just keep driving it for a little bit, that wood will suck towards the face that you're mounting it to. Just something to note. So as I said, rinse and repeat. It's 17 times of the exact same thing. Lift it up, space it, pin it off. Once all the screws are in, it should look pretty nice. It should fill out the space. Shouldn't take that long. The aluminum one you can see on the right side, that one took us about an hour and a half to build. The cedar one took us about the same, about an hour and 20 minutes. If you include cut time, because we had to cut all the cedar, it might be a little bit longer, but the question here is really just like which aesthetic do you prefer? And then the downside, obviously the wood is you're gonna have to maintain it, but it does look pretty cool, so just preferences. So once you've installed or screwed off all of the cedar, and put everything in place the way you need to, you have to snap on the remaining screw covers. As I said, you should have only had one screw cover on so far on one of the receivers. You have to put on the other 2 on a 9-foot case. On some of the other cases, you only have one more screw cover to put on. So in that case, what you do is you basically just set the screw cover over one edge on top of the other one. Use a dead blow or rubber mallet on this edge here just to hammer it in place and snap it off. You should get a nice tight fit. One thing I would recommend, make sure that you aren't starting one of them like that, where you then have to slide it up after you've beat it into place. It may be difficult to slide it up the way I'm doing right now. So definitely make sure it's lined up with the corresponding receiver. Hammer it into place. You will regret messing that up. And then make sure you're using the right one. Let's say you have a 2 and a 3-foot receiver on one side that you need screw covers for, and you start putting a 2 and a 2, you're gonna quickly find out you have to pry one off. So just lay everything out, measure twice, cut once. In this case, measure twice, hammer on once. So you can see with my wonderful facial expression, me beating on each of these screw covers into place. Once it snaps on, you're done. You should get all of them snapped on, and it should give you a nice clean outside look. That's one of the best parts about this product, I think. Our design here is the fact that you get a very clean, nice lines on a slat wall with a concealed fastener. You don't have a screw that's showing, or a hole in the wood that it was mounted to, or some sort of pocket screw or anything like that. You don't have to do any complicated dados or anything like that. You just use the screw cover, fasten it in place, face screws, easy to assemble, and then you get a nice clean aesthetic at the end. So a couple quick notes to make on the wood variant. You'll notice there were some marks, some chalk marks on the wood. Obviously that's dependent on yours. This one also isn't stained, so you'll notice that it's a little washed out. You do obviously have to stain these or paint them every year. Last big note on wood is going to be that the board that you use, depending on the thickness of the board, obviously this is a 1x, so a 5/4 board would be a little bit stouter and should still fit this pocket. This board, as it stands right now, is going to have a little bit of bow to it over a 12-foot span, which is what you're seeing us install here. It's because it's wood stretched out 12 feet. Like, it's gonna have some bow to it. So if you start pushing on it, you'll notice that it has some flex and some give. The same thing is partially true with our aluminum, but obviously this aluminum part has a lot more rigidity than does a piece of wood. Also, obviously with wood, you're gonna have it absorb water. So over time, when it absorbs water, it's gonna expand and contract. It's gonna wanna expand that way because that's how wood expands. I don't know if you knew that, but wood expands that way. And so because it wants to expand that way and it's gonna be captured on both sides, you might get a little bit of bowing in the lumber itself over time also, and potentially some sagging. That's the downside with a wood part. I have seen people put a reinforcing beam, basically, that runs straight up the middle of these slat walls, just to give it a little bit more rigidity, and then they pocket screw or fasten it to the top of our pergola or to a wood pergola, and then potentially to the ground. That'll give you a little bit more rigidity, but it's a 1x that's kind of in space. So just use your best judgment. If you're familiar with wood enough to do something like this, then just figure out what sort of lumber you want to use, what the pros and cons are. Obviously, the thicker the board, like a 1x8, will give you a little bit more stiffness and rigidity, especially to downward sagging. But these are all important things to consider when it comes to buying a wood version. You can also do a composite version. That one has more sagging down than does wood, but you might have a little bit more rigidity from actual bowing from front to back. And then obviously, if you want to go with aluminum, you're not gonna have any of those problems, but it's obviously gonna come at a little bit higher price point at the beginning. So consider what material you're gonna use, what the pros and cons are before you venture into this sort of project. That is the cedar slat wall. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions about this or the aluminum one, we do have a different video showing how the aluminum slat wall goes up. We have videos showing how our pergola goes up. If you're interested in this sort of product or our pergola itself, check out theluxurypergola.com. And thanks for watching.